Hey guys, tonight we are talking about times when medieval humanity nearly destroyed itself. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I always love seeing where you are listening from, so feel free to drop your location and your local time in the comments. It helps us feel a little more connected in this vast digital space. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up, and the first thing you notice is a smell. It is not the smell of your lavender scented laundry detergent or the faint aroma of last night's takeout. No, it is a heavy, stifling scent of damp straw, unwashed wool, and the metallic tang of wood smoke that has settled into every fiber of your tunic. You try to sit up, but your head throbs with a rhythmic pulse, like a tiny blacksmith is working an anvil right behind your eyes. In your modern life, you would reach for a plastic bottle of ibuprofen and check your temperature with a digital strip. But here, in this drafty, half-timbered room, your health is not about viruses or bacteria. It is about the delicate, invisible dance of the four humors. You are living in a world governed by the theories of Galen and Hippocrates, men who have been dead for over 1,000 years but whose words are still treated like the ultimate user manual for the human body. Your doctor arrives and he does not have a medical degree from a university you would recognize. He is more of a vibes-based technician. He looks at you and does not see a person with a sinus infection. He sees a vessel that is sloshing around with too much of one specific liquid. This is the mainstream historical fact of your existence, the humoral theory. To your physician, you are a cocktail of blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If you are feeling feverish and your face is flushed, he assumes your blood, the humor associated with the element of air and the season of spring, is throwing an unsupervised party in your veins. It is a bit like your car's dashboard lighting up because your oil is too thick, except instead of a mechanic changing a filter, this guy wants to balance your internal ecosystem using nothing but ancient guesswork and a very sharp stick. Imagine for a moment that your entire personality and physical health are just a game of The Sims, but the only sliders the game designer gave you were hot, cold, moist, and dry. If you have too much phlegm, you are considered phlegmatic, sluggish, pale, and probably a bit of a couch potato. If you are overflowing with black bile, you are melancholic, the kind of person who writes dark poetry and stares wistfully at rain-slicked castle walls. It is like being sorted into Hogwarts houses, but instead of a cool hat, you get a diagnosis that involves a lot of weird dietary restrictions. Your doctor leans over you, his breath smelling faintly of stale ale and onions, and begins to examine your most prized possession, a jar of your own urine. This is a quirky fringe tidbit of the era. Uroscopy was so advanced that doctors had color wheels to match your pee to different ailments. They were essentially the first sommeliers, but for bodily waste. He swirls the liquid around, looking for sediment or a specific shade of amber, and you wonder if he is actually going to take a sip just to be sure. It was a common enough practice that you really have to hope he had a palate cleanser ready. The room is dim, the only light coming from a single tallow candle that smells like a wet cow. You watch the smoke curl toward the ceiling and listen to the doctor mutter about the alignment of Mars. He is convinced that your headache is caused by an excess of blood that has nowhere to go. There is an open scholarly debate phrase often used here: the extent to which humoralism was a lived reality for the common peasant versus a purely academic exercise for the elite. For you, the peasant in this scenario, it feels very real. You're being told that your body is a battleground of elemental forces. In the modern world, we worry about our macros and our screen time. Here, you worry that your black bile might curdle if you think too many sad thoughts. It is a lot of pressure to stay balanced when the very air you breathe is thought to be heavy with miasma. You look around the room, your eyes tracing the rough texture of the stone walls. In the corner, a small pile of herbs is smoldering in a brazier supposed to purify the air. The smell is cloying. Rosemary mixed with something far more pungent, like burnt hair. This is your first taste of disaster medicine. It is a system built on a beautiful, symmetrical logic that is, unfortunately, completely wrong. It is like trying to fix a computer by pouring water on it because you think it looks thirsty. Your doctor smiles, a gesture meant to be reassuring, but one that only reveals his own yellowing teeth, and he tells you that the cure is simple. We just need to let some of that pesky, overheated blood out. You realize then that the balance he is looking for involves a basin and a blade. The humor of the situation, pun absolutely intended, is that this was the peak of human knowledge for centuries. People didn't just accept this, they fought for it. They believed that if they could just get the proportions right, they could live forever, or at least until they were 40. You think about how we today track our steps and our heart rate variability, obsessing over digits on a watch. Medieval people obsessed over the consistency of their phlegm. It is the same human impulse to control the uncontrollable, just with a lot more leeches involved. As a doctor reaches into his leather satchel, the clink of metal tools sounds unnervingly loud in the quiet room. You are caught in a medical philosophy that treats your body like a plumbing system that just needs a good flush. The visual of the doctor's robe, stained with the residues of previous patients, does not inspire confidence. There are no gloves, no masks, no understanding that the tiny, invisible things on his hands are far more dangerous than the moistness of your temperament. He believes he is a man of science, a follower of the great books. If the book says you have too much blood, then by God, you have too much blood, regardless of how pale you actually look. It is a terrifying kind of certainty. You close your eyes, trying to focus on the soft hum of the fan you imagined earlier, but the reality of the straw mattress and the approaching blade keeps you anchored in the present. This is the foundation of everything that follows. A desperate, logical, and utterly disastrous attempt to bring order to the chaos of human illness. You are not a patient, you are a chemistry experiment gone wrong, and the man with the knife is about to try a very radical reaction. You watch as the man rolls up his sleeves, revealing forearms that are thick from a lifetime of two very different trades. This is your barber surgeon, a title that sounds like a chaotic career day mistake in our modern world. Imagine walking into a Supercuts today and asking for a low fade, only for the stylist to ask if you'd also like your gallstones removed or a quick tooth extraction while the conditioner sets. Back then, the skills were considered remarkably similar. Both required a steady hand, a very sharp set of tools, and a complete lack of squeamishness regarding bodily fluids. Outside his door, you can see the wooden pole painted with red and white stripes. To a modern eye, it's just a vintage symbol of a haircut. But to you, lying there in the dim light, those colors have a much more literal meaning. The white represents the clean bandages, the red represents the blood, and that little brass ball on top, that's the basin used to catch the excess life force we're about to lose. The surgeon reaches for a tool called a fleam. It's a small, foldable device with several different sized blades, looking like a Swiss Army knife designed by someone with a very dark sense of humor. He doesn't use alcohol to sterilize it. He might give it a quick wipe on his apron, which is already a Jackson Pollock painting of previous patients' humors. He is looking for a good vein, usually in your arm, because according to the mainstream historical fact of the era, phlebotomy or venesection was the undisputed king of medical treatments. It didn't matter if you had a migraine, a broken heart, or a literal plague, the answer was almost always to open a hole in your circulatory system and let the badness leak out. He believes your blood is overheated, boiling with the humors of your fever, and the only way to cool the engine is to drain the coolant. It's the medieval version of have you tried turning it off and on again? Except the off part is sometimes permanent. As the blade makes contact, there's a sharp biting sting, followed by a sensation of warmth spreading across your skin. You watch the dark, crimson liquid pulse into the ceramic bowl he holds beneath your arm. The smell hits you immediately. A heavy, metallic scent, like a handful of rusted pennies dipped in warm water. It's thick and cloying in the small, unventilated room. You might think this would be a quick process, but your surgeon is looking for a specific milestone. He isn't watching a clock, he's watching your eyes. The goal, more often than not, was to keep draining until the patient fainted. In their logic, the moment you lost consciousness was the moment the rebalancing was complete. It's a bit like trying to fix a flickering light bulb by cutting the power to the entire neighborhood. Sure, the flickering stopped, but now everything is dark and you can't see where you're going. If the phlegm seems too aggressive for your delicate temperament, he might reach for his secondary staff, the leeches. This is a quirky fringe tidbit that was actually quite a massive industry. Leeches weren't just found in ponds, they were medical devices that were carefully collected, graded, and even kept in special ornate jars. He applies a few of these slimy, segmented worms to your skin, and you feel their tiny, saw-like teeth latch on. They secrete a natural anticoagulant, which is actually one of the few things medieval medicine got right by accident, but they aren't here to save you from a blood clot. They are here to feast on your plethora of blood. There is an open scholarly debate phrase often discussed in medical history circles regarding the biological rationale behind venesection in pre-antibiotic eras. Some argue that in very specific cases of iron overload or certain types of heart failure, it might have provided temporary symptomatic relief, but for a person already weakened by an infection, it was essentially like trying to help a drowning man by throwing him a bag of lead weights. You feel the strength draining out of you along with the blood. Your fingers go cold and the edges of your vision begin to fray into a dull charcoal gray. The surgeon looks pleased. He's commenting on the color and consistency of the blood in the bowl, noting that it looks too dark or too frothy, confirming his bias that you are indeed overflowing with corruption. He doesn't realize that by removing a significant portion of your blood, he is effectively sidelining your immune system's infantry. Your white blood cells, the very things meant to fight the infection racking your body, are being tossed out into a ceramic basin to be dumped in the gutter later. It's a beautifully ironic tragedy. The more the doctor tries to cleanse you, the more defenseless he makes you. The sarcasm of fate is that you are paying him for this. You are likely handing over a few precious silver coins or a stack of firewood to have a man make you significantly more likely to die. But in your mind, this is the height of care. You've seen the diagrams in the town square, the vain man drawings that show which parts of the body correspond to which astrological signs. You wouldn't want a bloodletting on a day when the moon is in Aries if you're treating a head wound. That would be crazy. You trust the system even as your heart begins to race, trying to pump the remaining dwindling volume of fluid through your failing pipes. The surgeon finally pulls the blade away and presses a scrap of linen to the wound, nodding as your head lolls to the side. The visual of the room is spinning now. You see the various jars on his shelf, filled with dried herbs and questionable powders, and you wonder if the dried treatments are any better than the wet ones. You're left there, pale and shivering on the straw, while he washes his hands in a bucket of water that has definitely seen better days. He tells you to rest and to avoid anything moist for the next few days, believing he has just saved your life. In reality, he has just invited every opportunistic pathogen in the city to a free buffet. Your body is now a hollowed out fortress, and as you drift into that forced, light-headed slumber, the sounds of the bustling, filthy street outside seem much further away than they did an hour ago. You've been balanced, but the scales are tipped heavily toward the grave. You are lying there, feeling as though your bones have been turned to lead and your spirit has been wrung out like a damp rag. Your stomach gives a low, hollow growl, a reminder that while your blood might be balanced, your energy is non-existent. You glance at the small wooden table near your bed, hoping to see a bowl of bright, juicy cherries or perhaps a sliced pear, something to provide a burst of sweetness and hydration to your parched throat. But instead, your caretaker, a woman with a face as weathered as a winter apple, whisks away the fruit you managed to scavenge earlier. She looks at a plum as if it were a live grenade. In this world, that piece of fruit isn't a snack, it's a biological hazard. Your physician has left strict orders. Because you have a fever, you are already too moist internally, and adding the juicy succulence of a peach would be like throwing gasoline on a metaphorical fire. This brings us to the mainstream historical fact of medieval survival, the Galenic dietary system. Just like the humors in your blood, every food item was categorized by its perceived temperature and moisture level. You might think a salad is a healthy choice, but to a medieval doctor, raw vegetables were dangerously cold and wet. They believed these foods would simply sit in your stomach, failing to cook properly in the heat of your digestion, eventually rotting and sending toxic vapors up to your brain. It is the ultimate irony. In a time when you desperately need vitamins to fight off infection, your medical experts are actively trying to keep you away from anything that isn't as dry as a desert bone. It is like a modern keto diet, but instead of cutting carbs, you're cutting out everything that doesn't have the texture of a cardboard box. Your meal is served, and it is a piece of bread so hard and dry that you suspect it could be used to patch a hole in the castle walls. It is twice baked, a medieval version of hardtack designed to be as indigestible and drying as possible. As you gnaw on this crust, you find yourself missing the modern world, where we argue over whether oat milk is better than almond milk. Here, the biggest debate is whether you should eat the dry bread plain or if you're allowed to dip it in a bit of watered down sour wine, which, coincidentally, was considered hot and dry, and therefore a medicine. You are essentially on a diet of crust and vinegar. The smell of the bread is dusty and yeastless, filling your nostrils with the scent of a long-forgotten pantry. It's a worst brunch ever, and there isn't a bottomless mimosa in sight unless you count the cup of bitter herbal tonic sitting nearby. There's a quirky fringe tidbit about these dietary restrictions. During the height of the Black Death, some local authorities actually banned the sale of fresh fruit in the markets. They weren't worried about pesticides or salmonella. They genuinely believed that the excessive humidity of a melon could open your pores and let the plague-infested air right into your soul. You are living in a reality where a strawberry is considered more dangerous than a rat. Imagine a SWAT team raiding a grocery store not for illegal substances, but to confiscate the apricots. It sounds like a comedy sketch, but for you it means your gums are starting to feel a bit soft and your skin is losing its luster. You are trading your long-term nutritional health for a short-term theory that has no basis in reality. As the days crawl by, the advice gets even more extreme. If the dry bread isn't cleansing you enough, the doctor might suggest a total fast. In the medieval mind, the body is a vessel that needs to be emptied of its earthly corruptions to make room for spiritual and physical healing. There is an open scholarly debate phrase often used when looking back at this era: nutritional status as a catalyst for epidemic mortality. This is a very academic way of saying that the doctors were effectively helping the disease kill the patients by making sure they were too malnourished to fight back. You aren't just fighting a virus or a bacterium. You are fighting a medical establishment that thinks your immune system is a myth and that your moisture is a real enemy. The visual of your current diet is bleak. A gray bowl of overcooked porridge, so thick you could use it as mortar, sits next to your bed. There are no vibrant greens, no citrusy yellows, just various shades of beige and brown. You find yourself hallucinating about the crunch of a fresh apple, the way the juice would burst across your tongue and soothe the fire in your chest. But every time you reach for a daydream of fruit, you remember the doctor's warning that moist foods cause putridity. He believes that by eating dry, indigestible foods, you are stoking the internal furnace to burn away the illness. In reality, you are just running out of fuel. You are a biological engine being asked to win a race while the pit crew is actively draining your gas tank and replacing it with sand. The dark humor of your situation isn't lost on you, even in your delirious state. You are being told that to survive, you must become as parched and withered as a piece of old parchment. If you survive the fever, you might just die of scurvy or simple starvation, but at least your humors will be balanced in your final moments. It's like being told to avoid the ocean because you're afraid of getting wet, only to die of thirst while standing on the beach. You watch a fly buzz around your dry crust of bread, and you almost envy the insect. At least it has the sense to look for something with a little more life in it. The air in the room feels heavy and stagnant, and you realize that even your breath feels dry. A small victory for the doctor, but a terrifying sign for your actual survival. You try to swallow a piece of the bread, but your throat is so constricted that it feels like swallowing a handful of gravel. There is no comfort here, only a rigid adherence to a book of rules that considers pleasure and nutrition to be signs of weakness. You're caught in a cycle where the very things that could help you, vitamins, minerals, hydration, are the things being withheld from you in the name of science. As you drift back into a light, hungry sleep, the image of a ripe, dripping peach haunts your dreams like a forbidden lover. You're starving in a land of plenty, held hostage by a medical philosophy that fears the very water of life. The dry bread sits like a lead weight in your stomach, but your doctor isn't finished with his balancing act. He decides that since your fever hasn't broken, it is time to bring out the heavy hitters. He reaches back into his satchel and pulls out a small, stoppered ceramic jar. When he tilts it, you hear a strange, heavy thudding sound from within, a liquid that seems to have more gravity than water. He pours a small amount into a spoon, and you watch, mesmerized, as a globule of shimmering silver liquid dances across the wood. It is quicksilver, mercury. In your modern life, you know this stuff as a neurotoxin that requires a hazmat suit to clean up if a thermometer breaks. But here, in this dim room, it is the ultimate cleanse. The doctor calls it a divine purge, believing that this heavy, indestructible metal will sink through your body like a silver cannonball, dragging all the corrupt humors and invisible demons out through your bowels. This is the mainstream historical fact of the chemical transition in medicine, the rise of iatrochemistry. While some doctors stuck to herbs, others, inspired by the likes of Paracelsus, believed that the only way to fight a powerful disease was with a powerful poison. It is like trying to get a red wine stain out of a white carpet by using a flamethrower. Sure, the stain is gone, but the house is currently on fire. Your doctor encourages you to swallow the silver liquid. It feels strangely cold as it hits your tongue, sliding down your throat with an unnatural weight. There is no taste at first, just a sensation of being filled with liquid stone. Within hours, your mouth begins to tingle, and a metallic tang, bitter and sharp like chewing on a handful of old keys, fills your palate. You might think something is wrong, but the doctor beams with pride. He tells you that the metallic taste is just the corrupt vapors being pushed out of your system. If the mercury isn't enough, he might suggest a topical application. He produces a thick, greasy ointment made of pig lard, mixed with mercury and perhaps a dash of arsenic for good measure. He begins to rub this blue ointment into your skin, focusing on your joints and chest. The smell is a nauseating blend of rancid fat and something acrid, a scent that reminds you of a blacksmith's forge. As the poison absorbs through your pores, you start to experience the success markers of the treatment. Your gums begin to swell and you start to drool uncontrollably. To a modern observer, this is a clear sign of the acute heavy metal poisoning. To your medieval physician, this is salivation therapy. He believes that every drop of drool hitting the floor is a drop of the disease leaving your body. He might even measure the amount of spit you produce in a day to see if the dose is high enough. It is the medieval version of a no pain, no gain gym bro, but instead of building muscle, he is systematically dismantling your nervous system. There is a quirky fringe tidbit about the sheer dedication to these poisons. The phrase, "a night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury," became a grimly popular saying. It referred to the fact that Mercury was the go-to treatment for syphilis. Patients would be locked in sweat boxes while smeared in mercury grease, essentially being slow cooked in toxic fumes. You are lucky you only have a fever, though the treatment is remarkably similar. You find yourself shaking, your hands developing a fine tremor that you can't control. This hatter's shake is another sign the medicine is working. You are becoming a literal heavy metal fan, though not in the way that involves leather jackets and electric guitars. You are just becoming heavy, tired, and increasingly confused. As the mercury does its work, your doctor might offer you a tonic to keep your spirits up. This often contains small amounts of arsenic or lead. He believes these substances, being fixed and pure in their mineral state, will lend their stability to your chaotic, fluid-filled body. It is like taking a modern daily multivitamin, if that vitamin was designed by a disgruntled alchemist trying to turn you into a statue. There is an open scholarly debate phrase often discussed in the history of toxicology regarding the diagnostic blurring between symptoms and side effects. In many cases, it was impossible for the doctor to tell where the illness ended and the mercury poisoning began. If your hair starts to fall out or your teeth begin to loosen in their sockets, he might just argue that the fever is particularly aggressive this season. He has an answer for everything, and that answer is usually more poison. The visual of your own reflection in a polished bronze mirror would be terrifying now. Your skin has taken on a waxy grayish pallor, and your eyes are bloodshot and sunken. The silver liquid you swallowed is currently working its way through your intestines, causing agonizing cramps that the doctor labels as the humors being stirred. He watches you with the detached curiosity of a scientist, perhaps jotting down a few notes on a piece of parchment. He is looking for heroic results. If you survive the treatment, it is a miracle attributed to his skill. If you die, it was simply because you were too far gone for even the divine metal to save. It's a perfect business model. You can't leave a bad Yelp review if your jaw has literally dissolved. You lie there, the metallic taste in your mouth so strong it's as if you've swallowed a whole set of silverware. The room feels like it's tilting, a side effect of the neurotoxicity that the doctor interprets as your earthly tether loosening. He talks about the purity of the metals, how they represent the celestial bodies, Mercury for the planet Mercury, lead for Saturn. It sounds poetic, but it feels like being slowly turned into a landfill. You try to tell him that you feel worse, but your tongue is too swollen to form the words. He simply pats your hand with his own lead-stained fingers and tells you to be patient. The cleansing takes time. The sarcasm of your situation is peak medieval. You are being killed by the very thing meant to save you, and you are expected to be grateful for the privilege. You watch the sun set through the small, grime-covered window, the light catching the silver residue on the spoon. It looks beautiful, in a deadly, shimmering sort of way. You are part of a grand experiment in iatrochemistry, a pioneer in the dangerous world of mineral medicine. As you drift into a fitful, toxic sleep, you wonder if the moist peach you were denied earlier would have really been more dangerous than the liquid metal currently circulating in your brain. The heavy, sweet scent of the rancid lard ointment lingers in the air, a final, suffocating blanket as the darkness of the room closes in. You wake up with a mouth that feels like it has been dry cleaned by a desert wind. The mercury treatment has left you with a thirst that no amount of dry bread can satisfy. You need a drink, something cold and refreshing to wash away the metallic ghost of the quicksilver. In your modern mind, you envision a crisp, filtered bottle of spring water or perhaps just a turn of a chrome faucet. But here, you have to settle for what the local environment provides. You stumble toward the window and look out at the river that snakes through the heart of your town. It looks picturesque from a distance, shimmering under the pale morning sun, but as you get closer, the visual reality begins to settle in. This isn't the pristine wilderness of a nature documentary. This is the town's multi-purpose utility. It is the dishwasher, the laundry machine, the trash bin, and the primary toilet for 10,000 people. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact that defines your daily risk. The medieval world had no concept of separating source water from wastewater. To you, the river is a living thing, and according to the science of the day, moving water is self-purifying. There is a comfortable, albeit deadly, belief that as long as the water is flowing, it is washing away the corruption. You watch as a tanner a few houses up dumps a bucket of lime and hair into the current, residue from scraping hides. A few yards downstream from him, a woman is dunking a basket of laundry, pounding shirts against the rocks. And just below her, a local brewer is dipping a massive wooden tun into the water to gather the main ingredient for his next batch of ale. It is a zero-waste circular economy, but in the most terrifying way possible. It's like a modern industrial water park, but instead of chlorine and slides, you have cholera and dysentery. You decide to head down to the public conduit, a stone structure where the water is piped in from the river or a nearby spring. The smell hits you before you even reach the queue. It's a pungent, heavy aroma, a mix of rotting vegetable matter, animal entrails, and the unmistakable scent of urban living. You see a neighbor filling a jug, and you notice the water isn't exactly clear. It has a slight brownish tint and some interesting floaties dancing in the light. If this were a modern Yelp review, the river would be getting a 1-star rating for unpleasant textures and suspicious aftertaste. But you are thirsty, so you cup your hands and take a sip. It tastes earthy, slightly sweet in a way that suggests fermentation, and has a mouthfeel that you can only describe as chunky. You tell yourself it's just minerals. In reality, you are inviting a microscopic zoo into your gut. There is a quirky fringe tidbit about medieval hydration. The idea that everyone was drunk all the time is a bit of a historical exaggeration, but they did drink a massive amount of small beer. This wasn't because they loved a midday buzz, though I'm sure it helped with the crushing reality of the 14th century, but because the brewing process involved boiling the water. They didn't know about germs, but they did notice that people who drank ale tended to die of the flux a lot less often than people who drank straight from the river. You are essentially living in a world where beer is the only thing standing between you and a very messy end. It's the ultimate irony. The church might preach against gluttony, but the local monk is probably the most hydrated and healthy person in the village because he has the best brewery. As you sit by the riverbank, watching a dead pig float lazily past, you might wonder if there's any pushback against this. There is an open scholarly debate phrase often used when discussing pre-industrial hygiene: the limits of the pre-modern sanitary imagination. Historians argue over whether medieval people were truly dirty by choice or if they were simply trapped by the infrastructure of their time. You see, they did have laws. There were fines for dumping filth into the streets or polluting certain parts of the stream. But when the city walls are tight and the population is booming, those laws are about as effective as a no splashing sign in a hurricane. You are part of an urban metabolism that is constantly recycling its own waste, a closed loop system that is perfectly designed to cultivate pathogens. The olfactory experience of this environment is something your modern brain would struggle to process. It isn't just one bad smell, it's a symphony of them. The river provides the bass note of damp decay, while the gutters provide the sharp, acidic highlights of human waste. You compare this to your modern life, where a slightly off smell in the fridge is enough to trigger a deep clean of the entire kitchen. Here, the off smell is just the air. You breathe it in and it feels thick, almost like you could chew on it. You see children playing in the shallows of the river, splashing each other with water that contains the biosignatures of the entire neighborhood's digestive tracts. To them, it's just a Saturday afternoon. To you, it's a biological countdown. You head back to your room, your thirst somewhat quenched, but your stomach already beginning to give a suspicious, gurgling protest. You think about the purity your doctor talked about, the balancing of humors and the cleansing of the blood. It seems absurd when you realize that every cleansing treatment is followed by a big gulp of liquid sewage. It's like trying to wash your car with a bucket of mud. You realize that the disaster in disaster medicine isn't just a treatment, it's the very foundation of the world you're living in. Your environment is an active participant in your illness. The visual of the sunset over the river is actually quite beautiful. The orange light reflecting off the ripples and masking the debris floating on the surface. For a moment, you can almost forget what's in there. You watch a group of men sitting on a bench, sharing a flagon of ale and laughing. They feel safe because they aren't drinking the water, not realizing that the ale was made with that very same water and that the cups were rinsed in the gutter. It's a delicate, fragile piece. You lean your head against the cool stone of your wall, listening to the gentle sound of the purifying river outside. And you wonder how long it will take for the microscopic guests you just swallowed to start their own party in your moist interior. You turn away from the river, the chunky aftertaste of your afternoon drink still lingering on your tongue, and head back into the heart of the city. As you move away from the open water, the sky begins to vanish. In your modern world, you are used to wide avenues and zoning laws that keep skyscrapers at a polite distance. But here, the architecture is a desperate vertical scramble for space. The houses are built with jetties, upper floors that overhang the street below. As you walk, each successive story leans further out toward the house across the way, until the roofs almost touch, leaving only a sliver of gray sky visible above you. It is like walking through a tunnel made of timber, wattle, and daub. This design isn't just about maximizing floor space, it is a giant structural keep out sign for fresh air and sunlight. You are moving through a stagnant corridor where the air doesn't flow so much as it just curdles. You push open the heavy oak door of your home and you aren't greeted by the quiet solitude of a modern apartment. Instead, you're met by a wall of warmth and a very specific earthy humidity. This is the mainstream historical fact of medieval urban life, the complete lack of boundaries between human and animal living spaces. In the corner of the ground floor, a large sow is rooting around in the floor rushes, her rhythmic grunting a constant soundtrack to your domestic life. A few chickens are perched on the lower rungs of a ladder, and the family cow is tethered near the back door, her massive, rhythmic breathing adding to the dampness of the room. You aren't living in a house, you're living in a high-density, multi-species hostel. It is an original co-living trend, though your current roommates don't contribute to the rent and they definitely don't know how to use a coaster. You might complain about your modern roommate leaving a bowl in the sink, but at least they aren't a goat that tries to eat your only tunic while you sleep. The visual here is one of constant blurred motion in the shadows. There are no windows in the modern sense, just small openings covered with oiled parchment or heavy wooden shutters. In the dim light, the air is thick with the density-dependent transmission threshold. This is an open scholarly debate phrase often used to describe the exact point where a population becomes crowded enough for a disease to become a permanent resident rather than a passing visitor. You're living well past that threshold. Every time the cow sneezes or the pig coughs, a fine mist of zoonotic potential hangs in the warm, still air. You are essentially a biological petri dish, and you're sharing your personal space with creatures that carry a whole different set of microscopic guests. It is like living in a studio apartment with a petting zoo, but without the hand sanitizer stations or the cute souvenir photos. The olfactory experience of this cozy arrangement is a masterpiece of sensory overload. There is the sharp ammonia tang of animal urine soaking into the floor rushes, mixed with the sweet, cloying scent of the hay they eat. Overlaying all of this is the smell of human sweat, unwashed wool, and the lingering metallic ghost of the mercury ointment you were smeared with earlier. It is a thick, humid fog of breath. When you exhale, your warm breath meets the cold dampness of the room, creating a faint mist that seems to never quite dissipate. You are constantly inhaling the effluvia of your neighbors, both human and animal. It is a world where a single cough doesn't just travel to the next room, it becomes part of the shared atmosphere of the entire block. You compare this to your modern life, where you might feel a pang of anxiety if someone coughs 3 aisles away at the grocery store. Here, you are literally breathing the same air as the cough's source for hours on end, in a room with the ventilation of a sealed Tupperware container. There is a quirky, fringe tidbit about why people tolerated this: the heat of the beast. In a world without central heating or cheap insulation, a 1,000-pound cow is essentially a giant walking space heater. Farmers and city dwellers alike kept their livestock indoors during the winter because the animal's body heat could be the difference between waking up shivering or waking up with frostbite. You are trading your respiratory health for a few degrees of warmth. It is a logical, desperate trade-off. You might be getting a lungful of bovine dander and various parasites, but at least your toes aren't falling off. It's a bit like deciding to sleep inside a giant fur coat that also happens to have a very active digestive system and a tendency to kick you in the middle of the night. As you navigate the room, your feet crunch on the rushes. A mixture of straw, herbs, and whatever else has fallen onto the floor over the last few months. You try not to think about what might be living in the bottom layers of that pile. You've heard that some people spread mint or lavender to mask the smell, but that's like putting a single air freshener inside a dumpster. It doesn't change the reality, it just adds a confusing floral note to the decay. You sit down on a wooden stool watching the pig watch you. There's a strange, dark humor in the proximity. You are the master of the house, but you are both trapped in the same 4 walls, waiting for the next miasma to roll through the street. You remember the doctor talking about your moist humors, and you realize that your entire environment is designed to keep you as damp and congested as possible. The social aspect of this density is equally suffocating. In these crowded cities, privacy is a luxury that hasn't been invented yet. You can hear your neighbor through the thin wattle and daub walls, their conversations, their snoring, their own bouts of the flux. It is a collective existence where your health is entirely dependent on the person living 6 inches away from you. If they bring home a foul air from the market, you are going to be breathing it by dinner time. It's a community-driven disaster, a mobile festival of infection, even before the parades start. You feel the weight of the city pressing in on you, the houses leaning over the streets like spectators at a gruesome play, and the animals huddling close for a warmth that comes with a very high price. You lean back against the wall, feeling the rough texture of the dried mud and straw. You think about how we today obsess over social distancing and air exchange rates. For you, in this moment, social distancing is impossible unless you want to live in the middle of a forest, and air exchange only happens if there's a particularly strong gale that manages to whistle through the cracks in the shutters. You are part of a warm, breathing mass of life, a tangle of limbs and fur and feathers all trying to survive the night. As the light fades completely, the room becomes a landscape of shadows and sounds. The rustle of straw, the heavy sigh of the cow, and the distant, echoing cough from the house next door. You are safe within the city walls, or so they tell you, but you are starting to realize that those walls aren't keeping the danger out. They are just making sure it has nowhere to go. As the sun dips below the horizon and the shadows in your cramped home deepen, the damp chill of the evening begins to seep through the wattle and daub walls. To combat the cold and the oppressive humidity of your livestock roommates, you turn to the heart of the home, the fire. In your modern life, you might flick a switch for central heating, or perhaps enjoy the controlled, aesthetic flicker of a glass-enclosed gas fireplace with a high-tech chimney whisking away every trace of residue. But here, your heating system is a bit more immersive. You kneel by the central hearth, a simple circle of stones in the middle of the dirt floor, and stir the embers of the charcoal fire. There is no chimney, there is no flue, there is just a hole in the thatch roof several feet above your head, which is supposed to act as a natural exhaust. It is a medieval version of a smart home feature, except it's remarkably unintelligent and works about as well as a screen door on a submarine. As the wood and charcoal catch, a thick, rolling plume of gray-blue smoke rises. It doesn't neatly exit through the roof as the builders promised. Instead, it hits the cool air trapped under the rafters and begins to mushroom outward, slowly filling the room from the top down. This is the mainstream historical fact of medieval domestic life. For centuries, the central open hearth was a standard for everyone below the rank of a lord. You are living in a permanent, low-grade gas chamber. Within minutes, the gray veil descends to eye level. You find yourself hunching closer to the ground, where the air is slightly thinner, but still carries a sharp, acrid bite that stings the back of your throat. It is like living inside a barbecue smoker, but instead of being a delicious rack of ribs, you are just a person trying to survive Tuesday. Your eyes begin to water, the tears carving clean tracks through the layer of soot that has already started to settle on your cheeks. The olfactory experience is overwhelming. It's not the pleasant, nostalgic scent of a campfire. It's a heavy, choking smell of incomplete combustion, mixed with the dampness of the straw and the lingering musk of the pig in the corner. You are inhaling a cocktail of carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, and fine particulate matter that would make a modern EPA inspector faint on the spot. This constant exposure is what historians call the domestic landscape of chronic respiratory stress. This is the open, scholarly debate phrase often used to explain why medieval populations were so uniquely vulnerable to respiratory crises. Your lungs aren't just pink organs, they are becoming soot-stained filters. You are essentially pre-smoking yourself, which I suppose is one way to ensure you're well done for the afterlife. Every breath you take is a microscopic assault on your bronchial tubes, leaving your respiratory system so inflamed and overworked that a simple common cold feels like a battle with a dragon. There is a quirky fringe tidbit about how people actually perceive this smoky environment. They often thought it was a good thing because they believed in the miasma theory that disease was carried by foul-smelling heavy air. They viewed the sharp antiseptic sting of wood smoke as a purifier. They figured that if the smoke was strong enough to preserve a ham hanging from the rafters, it was probably doing wonders for their internal organs too. They even noticed that the smoke killed off the wood-boring insects in the thatch and kept the rats at a distance. You are living in a world where people would rather choke on charcoal than smell the corruption of the street. It's like using a flamethrower to kill a spider in your living room. Sure, The spider is dead, but you no longer have a living room. You sit there, coughing a deep, rattling cough that seems to vibrate in your very marrow, and you tell yourself that this is the smell of safety. The visual of your home's interior is one of medieval chic black. Every surface, from the underside of the thatch to the wooden bowls on your table, is coated in a fine, greasy layer of soot. If you run your finger along a rafter, it comes away as black as a coal miner's glove. This soot fall is a constant part of your life. It seasons your pottage and coats your bed sheets. You compare this to your modern obsession with HEPA filters and air quality indices on your smartphone. Today, a 2.5 p.m. rating of over 100 might keep you indoors. In your medieval life, your indoor rating is probably somewhere in the thousands. And the only way to lower it is to put out the fire and freeze to death. It's a classic pick your poison scenario, and you've picked the one that tastes like burnt oak. The dark humor of your situation is that while the doctor is worried about your moist humors, you are literally drying yourself out from the inside with smoke. You are becoming a human version of beef jerky. Your voice has a permanent rasp, a medieval baritone caused by years of inhaling charcoal dust. You watch the motes of ash dancing in the firelight, swirling in the stagnant air of the room. They look like tiny glowing fairies, but they are actually just messengers of lung disease. You've noticed that your neighbor, a man who spends all day at the communal hearth in the alehouse, has a cough so persistent it sounds like a dog barking in a barrel. No one calls it chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. They just call it the winter throat and give him another cup of that small beer we talked about earlier. As you lean back, trying to find a pocket of air that doesn't feel like a solid object, you realize how this environmental stress ties back to the broader disaster of your era's medicine. When the plague or a major epidemic eventually rolls through these tight, smoky streets, it won't find a population of healthy, robust individuals. It will find a city of people whose lungs are already scarred, whose immune systems are busy fighting off the purifying smoke, and whose bodies are primed for collapse. You're a house of cards built in a wind tunnel. The lack of a simple chimney isn't just an architectural oversight, it's a biological death warrant that signs itself every time you light a fire to keep warm. The fire begins to die down, the orange glow casting long, flickering shadows of the animals against the walls. The room is quieter now, save for the occasional pop of a coal and the rhythmic, wheezing breath of your family. You feel a strange, heavy lethargy, a mix of the carbon monoxide and the exhaustion of a long day. You drift toward sleep, your head resting on a wooden block or a sack of grain, while the gray veil of smoke continues to hover just inches above your face. It is a suffocating blanket of comfort. You are warm, at least for now, and the bad air of the outside world is being kept at bay by the toxic air of your own making. As you close your eyes, the last thing you see is a single ember floating toward the hole in the roof. A tiny spark of light in a world that is slowly, quietly, being choked by its own hearth. The smoke from the hearth continues to hang in the air, but as you sit there, straining to hear the rhythmic breathing of your livestock, you realize that the house feels unnaturally quiet in one specific way. In your modern life, you're used to the comforting, low-frequency purr of a tabby curled up on your sofa, a creature whose biggest crime is occasionally knocking a glass of water onto your laptop. But here, the corner where a small lithe shadow should be prowling is empty. There are no cats in this house, and there are very few left in the city. You might think this is because of a sudden feline allergy or a shift in pet ownership trends, but the reality is far more sinister and, frankly, a bit ridiculous. You are living through what could be described as the original cancel culture, but with significantly more pitchforks and significantly fewer tweets. This is the mainstream historical fact of the great medieval cat purge, sparked in part by the 13th century papal bull Vox in Rama, which suggested that black cats were not just unlucky, but were active participants in satanic rituals. To your medieval neighbors, a cat isn't a cute companion that does funny things for the internet. It is a suspicious, nocturnal entity that walks between worlds. They see the way a cat's eyes glow in the dim light of a tallow candle, and they don't see biology. They see a connection to the occult. The logic was simple: if the plague is a curse from God or the work of the devil, and cats are associated with the devil, then the cats must be the ones bringing the foul air into the home. It is a classic case of correlation not being causation, but when people are dying by the thousands, they don't exactly wait for a peer-reviewed study. They grab a sack and a stone. You look out into the street, and the absence of cats has created a strange, eerie vacuum. The city, which used to have a functional, if informal, pest control department, has effectively fired its entire staff and burned the office down. This leads to a quirky fringe tidbit that highlights the sheer paranoia of the era. Some people actually believe that cats didn't just carry bad luck, but that they could literally absorb the plague through their fur and then breathe it onto sleeping humans. There was even a superstition that if a cat jumped over a corpse, that person would rise again as a vampire. Imagine being a cat just trying to navigate a room, and suddenly you're the reason Uncle Boris is going to become an undead bloodsucker. It's a lot of pressure for a creature that spends 18 hours a day licking its own paws. Because of these fears, the massacre was systematic. In many cities, thousands of cats were slaughtered in a desperate, misguided attempt to purify the urban environment. It's like deleting your antivirus software because you think the little shield icon looks a bit too judgmental about your browsing habits. The visual result of this feline genocide is immediate and catastrophic. As the cats disappear, a new sound begins to fill the silence of your home. It's a soft, rhythmic scratching. Not the occasional rustle of a single mouse, but a pervasive, multi-directional scuttling that seems to come from inside the very walls. Without their natural predators, the black rats, Rattus, are having the greatest real estate boom in history. They aren't just in the granaries anymore. They are in your bed sheets, your thatch, and the very straw you sleep on. You see them darting across the rafters, their black bead-like eyes reflecting the dying embers of your fire. They are the new masters of the city, and they have brought company. Each rat is a luxury cruise ship for the Xenopsilla chiopis, the oriental rat flea. These fleas are the real villains of our story, carrying the Yersinia pestis bacteria in their guts, but to you, they're just another part of the itchy reality of medieval life. There is an open scholarly debate, phrase often used when discussing this period, the anthropogenic shift in urban predator-prey ratios. Historians and biologists still argue about exactly how much the cat massacre accelerated the spread of the Black Death. Some argue that the plague was so efficient it wouldn't have mattered if every house had 10 cats. Others point out that by removing the primary predator of the rat, humans essentially built a high-speed rail system for the disease. You are a first-hand witness to this trophic cascade. You watch a rat confidently trot across your table, sniffing at the dry crust of bread the doctor left for you. In a world with cats, that rat would be a nervous wreck. In this world, the rat is basically a VIP guest at an all-you-can-eat buffet that just happens to be your life. The olfactory experience of this rat explosion is its own special kind of disaster. Beyond the smoke and the animal musk, there is now the sharp, acidic scent of rat urine and the greasy, musky smell of their fur. They leave rub marks along the walls, dark, oily stains where their bodies have pressed against the wood. You are living in a giant multi-species nest. You compare this to your modern life where seeing a single mouse in the garage is enough to call an exterminator and possibly move to a new state. Here, you are outnumbered. You feel a sharp itch on your ankle and reach down to scratch it, unaware that you are currently hosting a tiny hitchhiker that has just jumped off a rat and is looking for a warmer, more humoral place to stay. The flea doesn't care about your moist or dry balance, it just wants a meal. The sarcasm of the situation is truly peak human. In an effort to drive out the devil in the form of a cat, the people have invited a literal demon of a disease to take up residence in their homes. If a cat could talk, it would probably look at you from the safety of the afterlife and tell you that it's your own fault right before going back to a very long nap. You are a victim of a collective panic that prioritized superstition over the very obvious reality that rats are gross and cats eat them. It is a mobile festival of infection, where the guests of honor are six-legged and live in your clothes. You think about the purity your doctor keeps talking about, and you realize that the most pure thing in this room is the efficiency of the flea. You try to settle back into your straw, but the scuttling in the thatch above you is too loud to ignore. You can hear the rats fighting over a scrap of leather or a piece of fallen grain. It is a busy, bustling sound that makes your skin crawl. You miss the silence. You miss the predator-prey balance you didn't even know existed. You're trapped in a city that has been stripped of its defenses, not by an invading army, but by its own fear of the dark. The bad air isn't coming from a cat's breath, it's rising from the very floor you're lying on. As you close your eyes, the last thing you hear isn't a purr, but the high-pitched, chattering squeak of a rat that has just found a way into your store of winter grain. The disaster of disaster medicine has just found its primary delivery system, and you've helped clear the way for it. You lie still in the dark, but the world around you is anything but quiet. The scuttling of the rats in the thatch has reached a fever pitch, a frantic, rhythmic scratching that sounds like 1,000 tiny needles against the wood. But there is a smaller, quieter sound that you can't hear, only feel. It is a soft, light tickle on your forearm, the sensation of something no heavier than a dust mote navigating the forest of your arm hair. This is the mainstream historical fact of the 14th century biological apocalypse. You are currently providing the final leg of a journey for the Xenoscilla chiapis, the oriental rat flea. Without the cats we talked about earlier to keep the rodent population in check, these fleas have found themselves in a literal golden age of transportation. They have moved from the warm, greasy fur of a dying rat to the vastly more expansive, humoral landscape of your own skin. It is the ultimate upgrade, like moving from a cramped economy seat on a budget airline to a sprawling penthouse suite with an all-you-can-eat buffet. The visual of this creature, if you could see it under a modern microscope, is one of terrifying mechanical efficiency. It is a tiny, reddish-brown tank, flattened vertically so it can slip between hairs like a ghost through a doorway. Its back legs are biological catapults, capable of launching it over distances that, in human terms, would be like you jumping over a skyscraper. You compare this to our modern world, where we use specialized sprays and ultrasonic repellers to keep even a single gnat away from our patio. Here, the flea is the undisputed king of the bedroom. You reach down to scratch the itch and your fingers find a small, hard bump. You don't realize that as you press down, you aren't just irritating your skin, you are interacting with a biological machine that has been programmed by a bacterium to be the world's most aggressive waiter. This brings us to a quirky fringe tidbit about the flea's internal biology that sounds like a horror movie plot. When a flea ingests a Yersinia pestis bacteria from an infected rat, the bacteria don't just sit in its stomach. They multiply so rapidly that they form a physical, gelatinous mass in the flea's forestomach, or proventriculus. This is known as the plague plug. This blockage means the flea can no longer swallow any new blood. It is effectively starving to death while standing in a pool of food. In a desperate, frantic attempt to clear the pipe, the flea bites you again and again, and with each bite, it vomits a concentrated slurry of bacteria back into your bloodstream. It is a hungry, dying courier that has to cough on you to complete its delivery. It's the worst possible version of a delivery failed notification you could imagine. The olfactory experience of this infestation is subtle but pervasive. Beyond the thick wood smoke and the animal musk, there is a dusty, sweet scent associated with large numbers of fleas and their larvae, a smell that reminds you of an old, neglected attic or a pile of sun-warmed, unwashed wool. It is the smell of a localized ecosystem that has gone completely off the rails. You are breathing in the dander of the rats and the dried waste of the fleas, a microscopic dust that settles into the straw of your mattress. There is an open scholarly debate phrase, often discussed by modern epidemiologists, the human ectoparasite hypothesis. For a long time, we blamed the rats for everything, but many scholars now argue that the plague spread far too quickly for rats to be the only culprits. They suggest that once the disease hit the crowded, soot-filled cities, it was human fleas and lice, the ones living in your very tunic, that turned a local outbreak into a continental wildfire. You aren't just a victim, you are a walking, breathing vector. The dark humor of this is that while you've been worrying about the stars or the moistness of your pottage, the real threat is a 3mm insect that is literally starving for your attention. You think about your modern life where a glitch in the system means your Wi-Fi is slow or your food delivery is late. Here, the glitch is a biological blockage in a flea's gut that is about to reset the entire human population of Europe. You watch a stray spark from the hearth illuminate the air for a second, and you see the clouds of dust motes dancing. How many of those are actually dormant spores or bits of dried up corruption from the rats above? You pull your thin wool blanket tighter, but it's a useless gesture. The blanket is just more real estate for the hitchhikers. Your skin feels like it's crawling, a phantom itch that moves from your ankle to your neck. You compare this to the modern ick factor of finding a tick after a hike. In your medieval reality, being bitten is just called Tuesday. You've stopped counting the red welts. You've accepted the itchy reality as part of the penance the priests talk about. But this itch is different. It feels hot, a localized fire that seems to be spreading toward your lymph nodes. The mobile festival of infection has officially arrived at your door, and it didn't come with a parade. It came with a tiny, starving mouth and a biological plug that has finally given way. The bad air the doctor warned you about wasn't a mist from the river. It was the invisible, microscopic cargo being unloaded into your veins while you tried to sleep. The visual of the room is growing hazy again, not just from the smoke, but from a rising internal heat. You look at the dark shape of the cow in the corner, and for a moment, you envy her. She has her own parasites, sure, but she doesn't get the great mortality. You are the target. You are the host. You are the moist environment that the bacteria have been searching for. You realize that all the city walls and the purifying fires were just building a more comfortable nursery for the fleas. It's a beautifully ironic tragedy. By huddling together for warmth and safety, humans created the perfect high-speed transit network for their own destruction. You close your eyes, the scratching of the rats now sounding like a distant rhythmic drum beat. The metallic taste of the mercury returns to your tongue, a bitter reminder of the cures that are currently doing nothing to stop the microscopic invasion. You are a landscape being colonized, a territory being mapped by a force that doesn't care about your soul or your station in life. It only cares about the fact that your blood is warm and your city is crowded. As you drift back into a feverish half-sleep, the last thing you feel is a sharp, biting sting on the soft skin of your inner thigh. The courier has arrived, the delivery is complete, and the world you know is about to become a lot quieter, one tiny bite at a time. The stinging bite on your thigh is forgotten for a moment as a new sound begins to vibrate through the thin walls of your home. It isn't the scuttling of rats or the heavy breathing of your cow. It is a rhythmic, low-frequency thrumming, like a distant drum line marching towards your street. You pull yourself toward the window. your limbs feeling like they have been filled with wet sand, and you look out into the narrow, overhung alley. The bad air you've been breathing seems to pulse with the sound. Then you see them. A long, winding column of men dressed in rough, white linen robes marked with red crosses is shuffling through the mud. This is the mainstream historical fact of the mid-14th century's most desperate spiritual response, the Brotherhood of the Flagellants. They believe that the plague isn't a matter of fleas or moist humors, but a direct, scorching expression of divine wrath. To them, the only way to stop the great mortality is to offer their own skin as a sacrifice, preempting God's punishment with a self-administered version. The visual is something out of a fever dream, which is fitting, considering your current temperature. Each man carries a heavy scourge, a wooden handle with 3 or 4 leather thongs, each tipped with sharp metal studs or needles. As they chant in a low, hypnotic monotone, they swing the whips over their shoulders, the metal tips biting into the bare skin of their backs with a sickening, wet thwack. You compare this to a modern street festival or a particularly intense outdoor CrossFit session. Today, we might gather for a marathon or a music festival to feel a sense of collective energy. Here, the medieval Coachella involves significantly more blood and 0 overpriced avocado toast. You watch a man in the front row, his back already a raw, glistening map of crimson, and you realize that he isn't just hurting himself, he is performing a public service in his own mind. He is the biological lightning, rod for the city's sins. The olfactory experience of this procession is a new layer of horror. As a column passes beneath your jetty, the smell of the room, the wood smoke, and the pig is momentarily overwhelmed by the scent of the parade. It is a cloying, heavy aroma of iron-rich blood, stale sweat, and the pungent, vinegar-like scent of bodies that haven't seen a bathtub in weeks. This leads to a quirky fringe tidbit about the flagellant code of conduct. These men weren't just random masochists, they were part of a strictly regulated order. According to their rules, they were forbidden from bathing, shaving, or even changing their clothes for the entire 33.5 days of their pilgrimage, one day for every year of Christ's life on earth. They were also prohibited from sleeping in soft beds or speaking to women. You are looking at a group of men who are essentially weaponizing their own lack of hygiene. If the plague doesn't get you, the sheer bioorganic funk of a passing flagellant certainly might. There's a dark humor in the irony of their mission. They call themselves the Brothers of the Cross and claim to be bringing salvation, but in reality, they are a high-speed delivery system for the very apocalypse they are trying to avert. There is an open scholarly debate phrase often used when analyzing this phenomenon: the epidemiology of devotional mobility. Historians argue about the exact statistical weight these processions carried in spreading the plague from town to town. Because they traveled constantly, bleeding into the dust of every village square and then huddling together in tight, unwashed groups at night, they were effectively a mobile festival of infection. They were like a modern international flight during a pandemic, but instead of a pressurized cabin, they have leather whips and a total lack of understanding of germ theory. You watch them move toward the market square, leaving a trail of dark droplets in the mud, and you realize that the purification they are offering is just a fresh coat of corruption. The sarcasm of your situation is that you are supposed to feel comforted by this. Your neighbors are leaning out of their windows, some of them even weeping and throwing coins or bread to the marchers. They believe that this display of agony will appease the heavens. It's like trying to fix a broken smartphone by hitting yourself in the face with a brick. It doesn't address the internal circuitry, but it certainly makes a lot of noise. You feel a strange urge to laugh, a hysterical edge to your fever as you imagine a Yelp review for the flagellants. 1 star, very dedicated performers, but the blood splatter reached my front porch and now my cat is missing. Also, I still have the plague. Of course, you don't laugh because you don't want to be accused of being a heretic or a witch, which is the 14th century equivalent of being cancelled, but with significantly more fire involved. The visual of the market square is now a sea of white robes and red blood. The men have formed a large circle and are lying face down in the dirt, their positions indicating the specific sins they are atoning for. An adulterer lies on one side, a perjurer on the other. The leader of the group, a man with a voice like grinding gravel, walks among them, verifying their penance with more strikes of the whip. You compare this to our modern obsession with public accountability on social media. We might demand an apology video or a lengthy statement. They demand 3 sets of 12 lashes for every lie told in the last year. It is a raw, visceral form of social processing that makes a Twitter thread look like a polite tea party. As the sun begins to set, the chanting fades, replaced by the low moans of the exhausted marchers. They will sleep tonight in the local church or a crowded barn, their open wounds exposed to the straw, the rats, and the fleas we've already discussed. They are inviting every pathogen in the district to a feast. You realize that the disaster in your medicine isn't just a lack of knowledge, it is the active, enthusiastic participation in behaviors that make the disaster worse. The flagellants aren't the cure, they are the climax of the tragedy. They are the human embodiment of the plague plug in the flea's gut, a blockage of logic that causes the system to vomit its own destruction. You sink back onto your straw mattress, the thwack thwack of the whip still echoing in your ears like a persistent heartbeat. Your fever is rising, and the room feels like it is beginning to dissolve at the edges. The smoky, soot-stained rafters seem to pulse in time with the distant chanting. You are caught between a doctor who wants to poison you with mercury and a parade of holy men who want to bleed the world into submission. It is a world of heroic interventions where the patient is the only one who doesn't get a say, as the last of the flagellants shuffles. Out of your street, the silence that returns is heavier than before. It is the silence of a city that has run out of ideas and is now just waiting for the dark. The chanting of the flagellants has finally faded into the distance, leaving a ringing silence in your ears that is quickly filled by the sounds of your own labored breathing. You are no longer alone in your small, soot-stained room. Despite the bad air and the foul vapors that everyone seems to fear, your bedside has become the most popular destination in the neighborhood. In your modern life, if you were suspected of carrying a highly contagious, world-ending pathogen, you would be whisked away to a negative pressure isolation ward by people wearing what look like spacesuits. Your only contact with the outside world would be through a sterilized glass pane or a grainy Zoom call. But here, in the 14th century, social distancing sounds like a weird heresy. Instead, your room is packed. Your aunt is sitting on the edge of your straw mattress, your neighbor is leaning against the soot-blackened wall, and a local friar is hovering over you, his heavy wool habit brushing against your feverish skin. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact that made the Black Death an unstoppable juggernaut: the total absence of the concept of contagion. To these people, the idea that a disease could be passed from person to person through a cough or a touch was a fringe theory at best. They believed the plague was an environmental miasma, or a divine judgment that struck whoever God intended to strike. Therefore, isolating the sick was seen as not only useless but profoundly unchristian. To abandon a dying friend was to risk your own soul, which was considered a much higher stake than risking your life. You are the center of a holy open house, a communal gathering where the primary goal is to provide comfort, even if that comfort comes with a side of lethal bacteria. It is the ultimate group hug gone wrong. It's like trying to put out a fire by having everyone in the neighborhood bring their most flammable blankets and huddle around the flames. The visual experience of your bedside is a claustrophobic masterpiece. Faces loom out of the shadows, illuminated by the flickering, greasy light of a tallow candle. You see the concern in their eyes, but you also see the sweat on their brows. Every time you cough, a dry, rattling sound that seems to shake the very foundations of your chest, the people around you don't flinch. They don't pull back. In fact, your neighbor reaches out and wipes your forehead with a damp cloth that she's been using on her own children all morning. You compare this to the modern 6-foot rule, a distance that feels like a vast canyon compared to the 6 inches of space you currently have. Here, the best seat in the house is literally on top of the patient. There is a dark humor in the realization that your popularity has peaked at the exact moment you are most dangerous to be around. If only you had this kind of social pull when you were healthy and trying to get someone to help you move a heavy chest. The olfactory experience of this crowded room is shifting from the smell of wood smoke to something much more intimate and terrifying. There is the scent of sweet rot coming from the swellings in your armpits and groin, the buboes. To mask this, your visitors have brought nosegays, small bundles of dried lavender, rue, and wormwood. The air is a thick, cloying soup of floral notes and biological decay. It's like a high-end perfume shop built inside a landfill. This leads to a quirky fringe tidbit about medieval protective gear. Some people believe that carrying a piece of dried toad or a plague stone, a specific type of porous rock, could suck the venom right out of the air before it reached them. You see a small, dark stone hanging from a string around your aunt's neck, swinging back and forth as she leans over you. She believes that little rock is a magical filter. It's a 1340s version of a crystal healing kit, and it's about as effective at stopping Yersinia pestis as a paper umbrella is at stopping a tidal wave. As the room grows warmer from the collective body heat of your guests, the plague-plugged fleas we talked about earlier are having the time of their lives. They are jumping from your blanket to your aunt's tunic, from the neighbor's cloak back to the straw, and eventually to the friar. This is a socio-religious imperative of proximity, an open scholarly debate phrase used by historians to describe how medieval social values actually facilitated the collapse of the population. Scholars argue over whether the high mortality rates were fueled more by the biology of the flea or the stubbornly communal nature of medieval life. You are a living example of this debate. By being a good person and visiting you, your friends are essentially signing their own death warrant. It is a tragedy of good intentions. You want to tell them to leave, to run for the hills, but your tongue feels like a piece of dry leather and the words won't come. The sarcasm of your situation is peak medieval. You're being loved to death. Your community is so tight-knit that it's actually strangling itself. You think about your modern life where we complain about the isolation of technology and the loneliness of the digital age. In this moment, you would give anything for a little bit of that loneliness. You trade this meaningful human connection for a sterile room and a robot that delivers your meds in a heartbeat. You watch as the friar begins to recite a prayer, his breath warm against your cheek. He is so close that you can see the individual fibers of his hood. He isn't afraid because he believes his faith is a shield, or perhaps he has simply accepted that his time is in God's hands. It is a terrifying kind of bravery. It's like a modern person refusing to wear a seatbelt because they believe, if it's my time, it's my time. Except they're also forcing everyone else in the car to unbuckle too. The room feels like it is shrinking. The walls, already leaning inward from the jetty-style architecture outside, seem to be pressing in on the crowd. You notice that the neighbor has started to clear her throat. A small, insignificant sound, but in this room, it sounds like a gunshot. The cycle is beginning again, right there at your bedside. The mobile festival of infection has found a stationary home. You are the host of a party that no one can leave. You look at the candle on the table, the flame dancing in the stagnant air, and you realize that the bad air isn't a mysterious mist from the river. It's the very breath of the people you love. You drift in and out of consciousness, the faces of your visitors blurring into a single, shifting mass of humanity. You feel the weight of their hands on yours, a heavy, warm pressure that is meant to ground you but only feels like it's pulling you deeper into the straw. The disaster of this medicine is its heart. It's a system that prioritizes the spirit so heavily that it forgets the body is a physical thing that can be broken by something as small as a flea's bite. As the night deepens and the fire in the hearth sinks into a low, red glow, the room remains full. No one leaves. They stay with you, breathing your air, touching your skin, and carrying the seeds of the pestilence back to their own homes in their hair and their clothes. You are part of a beautiful, doomed tapestry of human connection. And as you close your eyes, the last thing you feel is a gentle, lethal touch of a hand on your own. The heavy, warm pressure of the hands on yours eventually fades as a light in the room changes from the red glow of the hearth to the cold, gray pallor of a winter dawn. But as you look around, you realize the holy open house has ended because there is no one left to host it. The silence in the house is now absolute, broken only by the rhythmic, indifferent chewing of the cow in the corner. You pull yourself to the window once more, your movement slow and heavy as if you're moving through waist-deep water. Outside, the narrow street is no longer filled with the chanting of flagellants. Instead, there is a new sound, the low, wooden groan of a heavy cart and the sharp, rhythmic ring of a bell. A voice, hoarse and weary, calls out into the stagnant air. Bring out your dead. It sounds less like a summons and more like a grocery list for the underworld. In your modern life, death is a sanitized, professionalized affair. It happens behind closed doors, handled by people in suits, and driven away in polished black cars to neatly manicured lawns where everything is quiet and orderly. You have a waste management system that keeps the cycle of life and decay at a polite distance. But here, the mainstream historical fact of the 14th century is that the infrastructure of death has completely collapsed under the weight of the great mortality. The cemeteries, those small, consecrated patches of earth tucked behind the local parish church, have reached their absolute capacity. They aren't just full, they're overflowing, because everyone wants to be buried in holy ground to ensure a smooth transition to the afterlife. The churchyards have become raised mounds of earth, sitting several feet higher than the surrounding streets. It is the ultimate real estate crisis, when the dead start taking up more space than the living, and the neighborhood starts looking more like a topographical map of human tragedy. You watch from your jetty as the dead cart stops a few doors down. The men working the cart aren't the somber, respectful professionals you'd expect. They are the bikini, often former criminals or the lowest rungs of society who have been pressed into service because no one else is brave or desperate enough to touch the bodies. They handle the departed with the same level of care you might give a heavy rug or a sack of spoiled grain. There is a dark humor in the realization that your final journey won't be in a silk-lined casket, but tossed onto a pile of your neighbors like a losing hand in a game of biological Tetris. You compare this to a modern landfill, but instead of plastic bottles and old electronics, the recycling is purely organic. If you ever complained about your commute being soul-crushing, try sharing a ride with 40 people who are literally no longer using theirs. The olfactory experience of the city has now reached its final, most pungent form. The wood smoke is still there and the fragrant river is still flowing, but overlaying it all is a thick, sweet, and heavy scent of mass decomposition. It is a smell that sticks to the back of your throat, a cloying richness that makes the nose gaze, of lavender we talked about earlier seem like a joke. This leads to a quirky fringe tidbit about medieval urban planning. Because the churchyards were so crowded, bodies were often buried in very shallow graves, sometimes just inches below the surface. During a heavy rain, it wasn't uncommon for parts to migrate. You might be walking to the market and find that the local cemetery has decided to come out and meet you halfway. It's like a pop up shop, but instead of artisanal coffee, it's just Uncle Oswald's tibia. To deal with this, they began using quicklime, a caustic powder meant to consume the flesh faster, which added a sharp chemical sting to the already chaotic bouquet of the street. There is an open scholarly debate phrase often used when looking at these mass burial sites: the stratigraphic integrity of emergency plague pits. Historians and archaeologists argue over whether these burials were truly the chaotic, tossed in messes described by horrified chroniclers like Boccaccio, or if there was still a level of ritual and order maintained even in the darkest hours. From your window, it looks pretty chaotic. You see a large trench being dug just outside the city walls, a plague pit that is being filled layer by layer. They call it putting in the pasta. A layer of bodies, a layer of earth, a layer of bodies. It's the world's most depressing lasagna, and you are currently watching the chef reach for the next serving. The visual of the city's water supply now takes on a terrifying new context. Remember that purifying well or the conduit where you took a drink? Most of those wells are located in the shadows of the very churches whose yards are now mounded high with the victims of the pestilence. In your modern world, we worry about microplastics or forever chemicals in our water. Here, you should be worrying about the micro ancestors. As the rain falls on the overcrowded churchyards, it filters down through the shallow graves and into the local aquifer. You are essentially drinking a cold brew infusion of the entire neighborhood's recent history. This is microbial leaching from substrata burial sites in its most literal, visceral form. Every cup of water you drink is a biological gamble where the house always wins. You look at the cup on your table and realize the cloudiness you noticed earlier wasn't just minerals, it was a message from the cemetery. The sarcasm of your situation is that while the doctor warned you to avoid moist fruit because it would rot in your stomach, he never said anything about avoiding the water that has been filtered through 1,000 corpses. It's like being told to wear a helmet to a knife fight. It's technically good advice, but it's missing the much larger, more immediate point. You think about how we today obsess over sustainability and circular economies. The medieval city has achieved the ultimate circular economy. The people go into the ground goes into the water, and the water goes back into the people. It is a perfectly closed loop that is spinning faster and faster toward total system failure. You watch a becino wipe his brow with a hand that has just handled a dozen corrupt bodies, and then reach into his pouch for a piece of bread. The cycle continues, indifferent to your modern sensibilities or your desire for a simple hand sanitizer station. The room feels colder now, the silence of the street outside punctuated only by the occasional clink of a shovel hitting a stone. You are a survivor for now, but you're living in a city that is becoming a tomb. The bad air isn't a theory anymore. It is a physical weight, a thick, greasy fog of wood smoke and mortality that you can almost taste. You compare this to your modern life, where air quality is something you check on an app before going for a jog. Here, the air is the news, the weather, and the obituary column all rolled into one. You sink back onto your mattress, the sound of the bell fading as the dead cart moves on to the next block. You realize that the disaster in your medicine isn't just the treatment or the lack of knowledge, it's a geography of the city itself. You're built on a foundation of your own losses, and the very water that sustains you is the same water that is trying to finish the job the flea started. You sit there on your straw mattress, the echo of the dead cart bell still ringing in your ears, and you find yourself waiting for the return of your physician. You expect him to walk in, see the overflowing cemeteries and the failing treatments, and maybe, just maybe, try something new. In your modern world, we pride ourselves on evidence-based medicine. If a drug doesn't work in a clinical trial, we scrap it. If a theory is disproven by a microscope, it goes into the trash bin of history. We are obsessed with the new, the updated, and the version 2.0. But as your doctor pushes open the door, he isn't carrying a new tool or a fresh idea. He is cradling a massive, leather-bound book with iron clasps, its vellum pages yellowed with age and smelling of dust and ancient dried ink. This is the mainstream historical fact of the medieval intellectual crisis, the absolute crushing authority of the great books. To your doctor, truth isn't found by looking at your swollen lymph nodes. It is found by reading what a Greek man named Galen wrote in the 2nd century. Imagine you're trying to troubleshoot a cutting-edge smartphone, but the only manual you're allowed to use was written for a Roman chariot. You point out that the screen is cracked, but the manual says you just need to grease the axles. In your medieval reality, the book is a territory and your body is just a noisy, often incorrect map. This is what historians call scholasticism, a method of learning that prioritizes the analysis of ancient texts over the observation of physical reality. You are lying there, a living, breathing piece of evidence that the current system is failing, but to your physician, you are just a difficult case that hasn't been properly aligned with the teachings of Aristotle. It's like being stuck in a 1,000-year-old terms and conditions agreement that no one is allowed to click decline on. You want to scream that the mercury is making your teeth fall out, but the doctor just flips to page 402 and tells you that your corrupt vapors are simply being stubborn. The visual of this encounter is a study in academic detachment. The doctor sets a book on a small stand, his fingers ink-stained and dry as parchment, carefully turning the heavy pages. He doesn't touch you. He doesn't even really look at you. He looks at the elegant, hand-copied Latin script. He is looking for a passage that explains why the great mortality is happening. This leads to a quirky fringe tidbit about the sheer stubbornness of this era. During the rare anatomical dissections that took place in medieval universities, the professor wouldn't actually do the cutting. He would sit in a high ornate chair, the cathedra, reading aloud from Galen, while a lowly demonstrator did the actual surgery. If the demonstrator opened the body and found that an organ wasn't where Galen said it should be, the professor wouldn't conclude that Galen was wrong. Instead, he would claim that the corpse was deformed or that the human race had somehow degenerated since the glorious days of Rome. You are literally wrong for not matching a 1,000-year-old diagram. It is the ultimate gaslighting. It's not the book that's wrong, it's your spleen. The olfactory experience of this section is the smell of a library in a tomb. The air around the doctor is thick with the scent of old leather, beeswax, and the slightly sweet animal smell of the vellum. It's a dry, sterile scent that contrasts sharply with the moist decay of the sick room. He represents the clean world of ideas while you are stuck in the dirty world of biology. There is an open scholarly debate phrase often used when discussing this period, the inertia of the Galenic paradigm. This is a fancy way of asking why it took so long for people to notice that their doctors were essentially expensive executioners. Some scholars argue that the church's control over universities prevented innovation, while others suggest that the intellectual framework of the humors was so logically consistent that it was almost impossible to think outside the box without a complete cultural reset. You're trapped inside that box, and the lid is made of heavy, authoritative parchment. There is a dark humor in the doctor's certainty. He looks up from his book and informs you that the plague is likely caused by a conjunction of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars in the house of Aquarius, as stated by the medical faculty in Paris. He's not even looking for a biological cause. He's looking for a celestial typo. You compare this to our modern WebMD spirals, where we look up a headache and convince ourselves we have a rare tropical disease. But at least our doom scrolling is based on a database that gets updated more than once a millennium. Your doctor is doom scrolling through a manuscript that was copied by a monk in a drafty monastery 300 years ago. He is a high-tech expert in a low-tech world, and his tech is a set of ideas that have been stagnant since the invention of the stirrup. The sarcasm of your situation is that you are paying for this expertise. You're handing over your remaining wealth to a man who would rather trust a dead Greek than his own eyes. You think about how we today value innovation and disruption. We want our doctors to be at the forefront of research. Here, being at the forefront means you have the most accurate copy of the oldest book. If a doctor tried to disrupt the industry by suggesting that maybe, just maybe, tiny invisible bugs were causing the disease, he wouldn't get a Silicon Valley investment, he'd get a visit from the Inquisition. You watch the dust motes dance in the light above the doctor's book, and you realize they are the only things in the room that are actually new. Your breathing is getting shallower, but the doctor is satisfied. He has found a passage in Hippocrates that mentions a pestilence of the lungs caused by southern winds. He nods, closes the book with a heavy thump that sends a cloud of ancient dust into the air, and tells you to keep your windows closed to keep out the meridional air. He doesn't notice the flea that just hopped from your blanket onto his sleeve. He doesn't notice the stratigraphic integrity of the cemetery across the street. He is shielded by his scrolls. He leaves you with a final piece of advice. Pray for a change in the wind. It is a beautiful, poetic, and utterly useless sentiment. The room feels darker as he leaves, the smell of the old leather fading and the smell of the pig and the wood smoke returning to claim the space. You are left alone with the inertia of a world that refuses to learn. You compare this to your modern life, where we feel overwhelmed by the constant change of information. In this moment, you would give anything for a single update, a patch notes for the human body that actually fixed the bugs. You sink back into the straw, the image of those iron clasps on the book burned into your mind. They aren't just keeping the book closed, they are keeping the future out. You're a casualty of a culture that fell in love with its own history and forgot to check if its history was actually true. As you drift back into a feverish sleep, the last thing you hear is the scratch of a quill from the room next door, as another scribe copies the same deadly errors for the next generation. You lie there in the quiet aftermath of the doctor's departure, the dust from his ancient book still settling in the shafts of gray light that filter through the shutters. Your breathing is a little easier now, not because of the mercury or the bloodletting, but perhaps because the fever has simply run its course through your moist interior. Or maybe it's because of the small terracotta jar tucked under your straw mattress, the one the local herbalist, a woman the doctor calls a crone, and a vile empiric, gave you when no one was looking. She didn't consult a leather-bound volume written in a dead language. She looked at your skin, smelled your breath, and applied a sticky poultice of crushed garlic, honey, and onions. In your modern life, you'd recognize honey as a natural antibacterial and garlic as containing allicin, a potent antimicrobial compound. You'd call this a home remedy backed by science. But here, this is the mainstream historical fact of the medieval Intellectual wall, the absolute refusal of the medical establishment to believe their own eyes if what they saw contradicted the great books. The visual of this conflict is stark. You see the herbalist poultice actually drawing the heat from your skin, the redness around your wound fading into a healthy pink. Yet, when the doctor returns for a follow-up, he looks at the healing flesh and scoffs. To him, the visible improvement is a dangerous illusion, a fluke of the humors that has no basis in logic because honey wasn't listed as a primary cure for pestilence in the works of Galen. He had rather see you pale and balanced by a blade than rosy-cheeked and cured by a kitchen ingredient. It's like having a modern IT guy tell you that your computer is definitely broken because the manual says a blue screen is fatal, even as you sit there successfully playing a high-def video game. Don't trust the screen, he'd say. The PDF from 1998 says you're in a state of total system failure. This leads to a quirky fringe tidbit about the sheer, stubborn commitment to academic tradition over physical reality, the rejection of the evidence of the senses. Some medieval scholars argued that the human senses were inherently deceptive and earthly, and therefore could not be trusted as much as the pure, deductive reasoning found in ancient texts. If you saw a treatment work on 10 people, but the book said it should kill them, you were expected to believe the book and assume those 10 people were just oddly tempered. It's the ultimate vibe check from the 14th century, where the vibe is a 1-200-year-old scroll and the check is your own impending funeral. You compare this to our modern life hacks or citizen science movements, where people try things and share results. In the medieval world, a life hack was often seen as a soul hack by the devil. If you found a way to survive without the official, painful methods, you weren't a genius. You were a suspect. The olfactory experience of this section is a battle between the old and the new. There's the sharp, sulfurous smell of the official mercury ointment still lingering on your skin, and the pungent, savory scent of the unofficial garlic poultice. It's as if your body is an aromatic war zone between a laboratory and a deli. You breathe in the garlic and feel a strange sense of grounding. It's a physical, earthy smell that doesn't pretend to be celestial or divine. It just smells like a cure. There is an open scholarly debate phrase often used when discussing this era, the epistemic closure of the late medieval academy. This is a fancy way for historians to describe a society that has become so locked into its own logic that it has lost the ability to process new information. You are living inside that closure. You are a biological fact trying to shout through a wall of philosophical noise. The dark humor of this situation is that the uneducated peasants were often doing significantly better than the elite. While the kings and bishops were being bled to death and fed liquid gold by the most expensive physicians in Europe, the peasants were using moldy bread on wounds, accidentally discovering penicillin, and eating leeks. You think about your modern world, where we pay a premium for artisanal and ancestral wisdom. In the 1340s, ancestral wisdom was just called not dying as fast as the rich people. You watch the doctor rearrange his tools, his movement stiff and practiced. He is a man who has spent 20 years learning how to be wrong with absolute confidence. He's like a GPS that is insistently telling you to drive into a lake because the map hasn't been updated since the lake was a meadow. The sarcasm of your situation peaks when the doctor notes your improvement and credits the cleansing vapors of the wood smoke we talked about earlier. He looks at your healing skin and concludes that his previous mercury treatment must have finally reached the marrow. He ignores the honey-stained rags in the corner as if they were invisible. He is a master of confirmation bias, a modern term for a very old habit of only seeing what you already believe. You compare this to modern conspiracy theorists or people who refuse to look at data that ruins their favorite argument. Except, In your case, the argument is whether or not you get to keep breathing. You want to point to the herbalist's jar and say, hey, maybe it's the bee spit and the onions, but you know that would just lead to a very long lecture on the meridional winds and possibly a charge of witchcraft. The visual of the room is changing as you regain your strength. The soot on the rafters doesn't look like a purifying veil anymore. It just looks like dirt. The scuttling of the rats in the walls doesn't sound like a divine drumbeat. It just sounds like a pest problem. You are starting to see the world as it is, not as the great books say it should be. This transition from faith-based medicine to observation-based survival is the most dangerous journey you can take in the medieval world. It's a quiet revolution happening in a single room, fueled by honey and a refusal to ignore your own senses. You are becoming an empiric, a person who learns from experience, which is the most terrifying thing a scholastic doctor can imagine. As the doctor prepares to leave, he gives you a final, satisfied nod. He believes he has won a great victory for Galenic science. He tells you that your humors have finally submitted to his authority. You watch him walk out the door, his heavy robes brushing against the filth of the street, and you realize that he is a ghost of a dying intellectual age. He is a man who would rather be right by the book than successful by the patient. You reach under the mattress and pull out the little jar of honey. It's sticky, it's messy, and it's completely unscientific according to the university in Paris. But it's the reason you're still here to see the sunset. You compare this to your modern life where we often get caught up in the right way to do things. The perfect morning routine, the correct diet, the latest productivity app. Sometimes we forget to just look at what is actually working. You realize that disaster medicine isn't just about the bad treatments. It's about the arrogance of thinking we've already learned everything there is to know. The disaster is the closing of the mind. You lie back, the scent of the garlic and honey wrapping around you like a warm, forbidden blanket. You're a survivor of the system, a living anomaly in a world of rigid logic. As you drift toward a more natural, restful sleep, you listen to the sounds of the city, the carts, the bells, the distant shouting, and you realize that the future won't be built by the men with the big books, but by the people who weren't afraid to look at a bee and see a doctor and see. You sit on the edge of your bed, your feet finally touching the cool, packed earth floor without the world spinning into a kaleidoscope of gray shadows. The great mortality has left your city a hollowed out version of itself, a place where the silence is now more aggressive than the noise once was. In your modern world, recovery from a crisis is marked by reopening ceremonies, celebratory news cycles, and a collective rush back to the neon glow of the familiar. But here, the recovery is a slow, wary emergence into a landscape that has been fundamentally reshaped. You look at the empty stalls in the market and the shuttered houses where the bechini have already done their grim work. The disaster of medieval medicine has passed over you, leaving you as a strange, living artifact of a system that tried its best to kill you in the name of saving you. You are a survivor of bloodletting, mercury, starvation, and the mobile festival of infection that was your own community. The visual of the city today is one of stark, unintended beauty. Without the constant churn of a peak population, the heavy miasma of smoke and human waste has thinned. The sliver of sky between the jettied houses looks a little brighter, a little more blue. This is the mainstream historical fact of the post-plague era. The massive labor shortage and the sudden abundance of land and resources for the survivors. You're living through the great leveling. Because so many people are gone, your labor is suddenly worth twice as much. You are no longer just a vessel of humors to be drained. You are a valuable asset in a world that needs to be rebuilt. You compare this to a modern economic shift, a sudden, violent market correction that leaves the survivors with a strange, guilty kind of leverage. You have more food, more space, and for the first time in your life, a bit of hope that isn't tied to an ancient scroll. There's a quirky fringe tidbit about the psychological aftermath of this disaster, the rise of the dance macabre. In the years following the plague, you see paintings popping up on church walls and in public squares showing skeletons dancing with people of all ranks, kings, monks, and peasants alike. It wasn't just dark art, it was a cultural coping mechanism, a way of saying, yeah, the medicine failed, the books were wrong, and death doesn't care about your VIP status. It is the 14th century version of a viral meme that everyone shares because the reality is too heavy to process any other way. You see a group of children playing a skipping game in the street, their rhymes echoing the dark humor of the era. They aren't afraid of the bad air anymore. They've seen the worst and they're still dancing. There's an open scholarly debate phrase often discussed when looking at the end of this period, the catalyst for the medical renaissance. Historians argue about how much the failure of disaster medicine actually forced the next generation to start looking at anatomy and chemistry with fresh eyes. You are standing at the very beginning of that shift. You've seen the limits of the great books, and you've felt the healing power of the Crohn's garlic. You are part of a generation that is starting to ask why, instead of just where is it in the book. It is a quiet, intellectual dawn. You compare this to our modern scientific revolutions, where a single discovery, like CRISPR or AI, suddenly makes everything we thought we knew look like a Roman chariot manual. You are the version 1.1 of a more observant humanity. The sarcasm of your survival isn't lost on you as you take a deep breath of the surprisingly fresh air. You realize that the disaster wasn't just a disease, it was a certainty. The disaster was a world that thought it had all the answers locked in a leather-bound jar. You look at your hands, still a bit shaky but strong enough to work. You think about the modern world you once knew, the world of vaccines, antibiotics, and clean water. You realize that those things weren't just invented, they were fought for by people who, like you, decided that the old ways weren't good enough anymore. You are a pioneer of the future simply by refusing to die according to the ancient rules. You are the bridge between the world of miasma and the world of the microscope, even if you don't know what a microscope is yet. As the sun begins to set, casting long golden shadows across the empty square, the pacing of your life feels different. It is slower, more deliberate. You are no longer rushing toward a rebalancing of your humors. You're just living. The air is cooling, and you feel a sense of peace that you haven't felt since this journey began. The animals in the house are quiet. The hearth is glowing with a soft, manageable warmth, and the heavy, toxic veil of the city has lifted. You have traveled through the heart of a medical catastrophe and come out the other side with a story that the great books could never contain. You are the living proof that the most important humor is the human will to keep breathing, even when the wind is blowing from the south. The world outside your window is finally still. The narrow streets, once heavy with the weight of carts and the chanting of the desperate, have surrendered to the soft embrace of the evening. The shadows of the jettied houses stretch out across the cobbles, no longer looking like leaning giants, but like protective friends, guarding the silence of a city that is finally resting. You can feel the coolness of the air on your skin, not the moist chill of a fever, but the crisp, honest touch of a world that is moving on. The smell of the wood smoke has faded into a faint, nostalgic perfume, and the heavy scent of the river has been washed away by the falling dew. You are safe. You are whole. You are here. Let the tension in your shoulders dissolve into the straw of your mattress, which now feels as soft as a cloud. Your breathing is deep and rhythmic, a steady pulse that matches the quiet heartbeat of the sleeping city. The images of the doctors, the scrolls, and the silver mercury are fading now, dissolving like mist in the morning sun. They are just stories from a long running dream, a history that has already been written and put away on a high, dusty shelf. There are no more pulses to check, no more humors to balance. There is only the soft, velvet darkness of the night and the reassurance that the morning will bring a light that is clear, bright, and new. Your journey through the disaster is over. The path ahead is quiet and lined with silver moonlight. Close your eyes now, let the world drift away, and let yourself sink into a deep, dreamless rest. Everything is balanced. Everything is still.